50 feet below the streets of divided Berlin, in total darkness, a shovel strikes concrete. The digger freezes. One sound, one vibration through the earth, and the Stasi will come. Above ground, the Cold War rages. Down here, a group of university students is attempting something impossible. They're tunneling under the most heavily guarded border on Earth to tap into the enemy's phone lines. How did college kids end up running one of the boldest espionage operations of the 20th century? In the spring of 1962, West Berlin was an island of freedom inside communist East Germany. The Berlin Wall had gone up the previous August, cutting the city in half with concrete, barbed wire, and armed guards. Families were separated overnight. Friends couldn't cross the street to see each other. But a small group of engineering students in West Berlin refused to accept the division. They weren't professional spies. They were young people who'd lost friends, classmates, and loved ones behind the wall. And they had an idea that sounded insane. Dig a tunnel under the border, not to escape, but to listen. This is the story of Tunnel 57 and the connected espionage efforts that blurred the line between student activism and Cold War intelligence operations. The idea began in a cramped apartment near the Technical University of West Berlin in early 1962. A group of students, many of them refugees who'd fled East Germany before the wall went up, gathered around a hand-drawn map. They calculated distances, studied soil reports, and made a dangerous decision. They would dig. The starting point was a disused bakery in West Berlin, just 150 yards from the wall. The endpoint would be a basement in East Berlin, beneath an apartment building on Bernauer Strasse. The tunnel would run 145 meters through clay, sand, and groundwater. None of them were miners. None of them had military training. They were architecture students, engineering majors, and one former competitive swimmer. Work began in April 1962. They dug in shifts, sometimes 16 hours a day. The tunnel was barely 2 feet high and 2 feet wide. Diggers crawled on their stomachs, scooping earth into metal trays that were dragged back on a rope. There was no ventilation system at first, just a hand-cranked fan jury-rigged from scrap parts. The air was thick, suffocating, heavy with the smell of wet clay. Lower Third, April-September 1962, Bernauer Strasse, West Berlin. By summer, the tunnel had stretched nearly 100 meters, but the students faced a critical problem. How would they know when they'd reached the right building? They needed intelligence, real-time information about border patrols, guard shifts, and the layout of the target basement. That's when the operation took a darker turn. According to declassified documents, members of the group made contact with Western intelligence operatives who provided equipment and guidance source. CIA declassified memo, released 1999. Some sources suggest the CIA saw the tunnel as a potential asset for eavesdropping on East German communications document. National Security Archive, Berlin Tunnel Project files. The students weren't naive. They knew the risks. If caught, they'd be arrested by the Stasi, East Germany's secret police. Interrogation, imprisonment, possibly worse. But they also knew something else. The East German government was terrified of tunnels. Every escape attempt, every breach in the wall was a propaganda disaster. And this wasn't just about escape. This was about information. On the night of September 14, 1962, the tunnel broke through into the basement of the target building. The students had done it. But what happened next remains partially classified. According to later testimonies, some members of the group installed listening devices near telecommunication lines running through the building source. Der Spiegel investigation, 1997. Others focused on evacuation operations, helping 57 East Berliners escape to the west over the following weeks. Question: if you were in that basement, hearing footsteps above you, would you keep digging or run? The tunnel operated for weeks. Then, in October, disaster struck. An informant tipped off the Stasi. East German guards stormed the basement. Shots were fired. One border guard was killed in the chaos. The students barely escaped back through the tunnel before it was sealed with concrete source. Berlin Wall Archive, eyewitness accounts. The existence of Tunnel 57 is well documented. Photographs of the tunnel entrance, the narrow shaft, and the crude tools used by the diggers have been displayed in Berlin's museums for decades. Document. Berlin Wall Memorial Archives. Interviews with surviving participants were recorded in the 1990s and early 2000s, providing first-hand accounts of the digging process. Footage. German television documentary, The Tunnels of Berlin, 2001. However, the espionage component is murkier. Declassified CIA documents from the 1990s acknowledge that Western intelligence agencies monitored tunnel projects in Berlin and occasionally provided technical assistance to groups attempting border breaches. Source: CIA Freedom of Information Act release, 1999. But the exact nature of this assistance, whether it included surveillance equipment, intelligence sharing, or active operational support, remains partially redacted. One former participant, identified only as Klaus M., in a 1997 interview, alleged that the group received radio equipment and rudimentary wiretapping tools from an American contact source. Der Spiegel, October 1997. He claimed they successfully intercepted low-level communications for approximately 3 weeks before the tunnel was discovered. German historians have corroborated parts of this account, but note that no recordings or transcripts have ever been made public. Document. Institute for Contemporary History, Munich. The Stasi's own records, released after German reunification, confirm that they were aware of multiple tunnel projects in 1962 and devoted significant resources to detecting them. Source: Stasi Archives, B.U. Records. Internal memos describe heightened acoustic surveillance and increased informant activity near known student activist networks. One report, dated September 1962, mentions suspected Western intelligence involvement in tunnel Operation Bernauer Strasse, but provides no concrete evidence. INFOCARD. What we know: tunnel existed, 57 people escaped, 1 death confirmed, unconfirmed extent of CIA involvement, success of wiretapping operation. Conflicting views and gaps. Not everyone agrees on the tunnel's true purpose. Some historians argue that the espionage element has been exaggerated over time, possibly by intelligence agencies seeking to claim credit for student-led operations. Source: historian Dr. Maria Herhen, academic paper, 2005. They point out that the students' primary stated goal was always humanitarian, rescuing people trapped in the East. Others suggest the wiretapping story was deliberately spread by the Stasi to justify their crackdown on student movements and to discredit the tunnelers as Western agents rather than freedom fighters. In this interpretation, the spy tunnel narrative served both sides. It made the CIA look competent and the students look like pawns. There's also debate about the death that occurred during the tunnel's collapse. East German authorities claimed a border guard was shot by Western operatives. Western sources reported it was an accidental discharge during a chaotic confrontation. No definitive forensic evidence has ever been made public. The guard's family was never given full access to investigative files. What's clear is that the tunnel existed, people escaped through it, and someone died. What remains uncertain is how much of the operation was student idealism and how much was intelligence tradecraft. Human impact. For the 57 people who escaped through the tunnel, the impact was life-changing. They left behind homes, families, jobs, and identities. Some never saw their relatives again. One escapee, a schoolteacher named Ng Sturm, later described the terror of crawling through the dark, narrow passage with her young daughter, not knowing if Stasi guards were waiting at the other end. Source: Oral History Interview, Berlin Wall Memorial, 2003. The students who dug the tunnel paid their own price. Several were later identified by Stasi informants and could never safely visit East Germany again, even to see family. Some struggled with guilt over the guard's death. Others became minor celebrities in the West, though that attention often felt hollow when weighed against what they'd sacrificed and witnessed. The families left behind in the East faced interrogation and suspicion. Having a relative who escaped through a tunnel marked you as politically unreliable. Some lost jobs. Children were denied access to universities. The ripples of that single night in September 1962 spread across generations. Expert lens: why it matters. To understand this story, you need to understand what the Berlin Wall represented. It wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a symbol of ideological warfare, a concrete manifestation of the idea that the world could be divided into us and them. Every tunnel, every escape, every act of defiance against the wall was a rejection of that division. The students who dug Tunnel 57 were part of a broader underground resistance movement. Between 1961 and 1989, more than 70 tunnels were attempted under the Berlin Wall. Most failed. Some collapsed, killing the diggers. Others were discovered before completion. But each one represented the same human impulse: the refusal to accept that a wall, any wall, could permanently separate people who wanted to be together. Sidebar: the Berlin Wall stood from August 13, 1961 to November 9, 1989, 28 years, 2 months, and 27 days. The espionage angle adds a layer of moral complexity. If Western intelligence agencies did use student-led humanitarian operations as cover for surveillance, does that taint the students' motives? Or does it simply reflect the brutal pragmatism of Cold War espionage, where every action served multiple purposes? There's no easy answer. What's certain is that the students believed they were doing the right thing, and for 57 people, they absolutely were. This story also matters because it challenges our assumptions about who gets to be a spy. We think of intelligence operatives as trained professionals in dark suits, but some of the most effective Cold War operations were carried out by amateurs, students, housewives, priests, people who didn't fit the profile and therefore didn't trigger suspicion. Mini recap: pattern break. So here's what we know for certain. Students dug a tunnel under the most dangerous border in the world. 57 people escaped. 1 person died. Western intelligence was aware of the operation and possibly involved. What we don't know is the full extent of that involvement, or whether the wiretapping efforts, if they happened, yielded anything useful. What happened to those students after the tunnel was sealed is a story about how ordinary people are pulled into extraordinary circumstances and how they live with the consequences. What's next? Scenarios. For those interested in this history, several developments are worth watching. Confidence high. More Stasi documents are still being processed and released to the public. Historians continue to file access requests for files related to tunnel operations. It's likely that additional details about informant networks and Stasi countermeasures will emerge in the coming years. Confidence medium. Some former CIA operatives from the Berlin station during the 1960s are still alive. As they age, more may choose to speak publicly about their work. Deathbed revelations or late career memoirs could shed light on the agency's involvement in student tunnel projects. Confidence low. The possibility of discovering actual surveillance recordings from Tunnel 57 is remote. If such recordings existed, they were likely destroyed or remain in classified archives. But intelligence communities have surprised us before with unexpected declassifications. The broader lesson is this: the full story of the Cold War is still being written. Every year, new archives open, new witnesses come forward, and our understanding deepens. The students who dug under the wall are mostly in their 80s now. Their story, once buried in secrecy and propaganda, has finally tunneled its way to the light. Outro and CTA. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989, but the tunnels beneath it remain. Some have been preserved as memorials. Others collapsed long ago, filled with rubble and groundwater. What endures is the memory of people who refused to accept that concrete and barbed wire could define their lives. They grabbed shovels and started digging. If you want to understand more about how ordinary people became Cold War operatives, watch our video on the housewife who became America's most valuable spy. It's a story about courage in the most unlikely places, much like this one. This script is based on declassified documents, academic research, oral histories, and archival footage. Some details remain disputed or classified. We'll update this video's description if significant new information emerges. The history of Tunnel 57 is still, in many ways, being excavated. Content note: this video discusses an incident involving a death during a border confrontation. Details are presented factually and without graphic content. Source notes and disclaimer. Primary sources include CIA declassified documents, FOIA releases, 1999, Stasi archives, Becent U, Berlin Wall Memorial Oral Histories, German News Archives, Der Spiegel, 1997, and academic research from historians specializing in Cold War Berlin. Some participant names have been changed or omitted to protect privacy. Claims about intelligence involvement that remain partially redacted or unconfirmed are clearly marked as such. This documentary presents historical information for educational purposes and does not take a position on ongoing intelligence matters. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon for more amazing videos.